My name is Margaret O'Sullivan, and I'm about to tell you a story that changed everything between my son and me forever. At 62, I thought I'd seen it all. 3 years of divorce proceedings, countless sleepless nights, and the slow, painful process of rebuilding my life from scratch. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what happened on Thanksgiving Day 2023. I live alone now in the same house where I raised David, my only child. It's a modest 2-story colonial in suburban Boston, with creaky hardwood floors that echo my footsteps when I walk through rooms that once buzzed with family life. The walls still hold 28 years of memories. David's first steps in the living room, his high school graduation photos lining the hallway, the kitchen table where we shared countless meals before everything fell apart. Every morning I wake up at 6:30 sharp, make my coffee in the same blue ceramic mug David gave me for Mother's Day 15 years ago, and sit by the kitchen window watching the neighbors start their day. Mrs. Henderson walks her golden retriever. Mr. Peterson backs his truck out of the driveway for another day at the construction site. Normal people living normal lives, while I've been navigating the aftermath of a marriage that imploded and took my relationship with my son down with it. I work part-time at the local library now, cataloging books and helping patrons find what they're looking for. It's quiet work that suits me perfectly. After 30 years as a high school English teacher, dealing with teenagers and their drama, the peaceful silence of the library feels like a sanctuary. My colleagues know about the divorce. Small towns don't keep secrets, but they're kind enough not to pry. They see me as the woman who keeps to herself, does her job well, and leaves promptly at 3 o'clock every day. But what they don't see is how I spend my evenings, how I sit in David's old bedroom, surrounded by his childhood memorabilia, trying to understand where I went wrong. His baseball trophies still line the shelves. His Boston Celtics posters remain taped to the walls. The room is frozen in time, like a museum dedicated to the boy he used to be before his father turned him against me. David was my miracle baby. After years of trying and 2 miscarriages, he arrived on a snowy February morning, weighing exactly 7 pounds and 3 ounces. From the moment they placed him in my arms, I knew my life's purpose was to love and protect this child. I was 34 then, old enough to appreciate the gift I'd been given, young enough to throw myself completely into motherhood. For 25 years, we were inseparable. David was the kind of kid who actually wanted to spend time with his mom. While his friends were embarrassed by their parents, David would invite me to his soccer games, introduce me proudly to his girlfriends, call me just to chat about his day. Even through his teenage years, when most boys pushed their mothers away, David and I maintained a closeness that made other parents envious. We had our traditions. Every Sunday morning, we'd drive to Murphy's Diner for blueberry pancakes and hot chocolate. During Red Sox season, we'd watch games together on the couch, him explaining the strategy while I pretended to understand the infield fly rule. When he went away to college, he called every Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock sharp, no matter what parties or activities were happening on campus. Robert used to joke that David and I were joined at the hip. At the time, I thought he was being affectionate. Now I realize there was jealousy simmering beneath those words, a resentment that would eventually poison everything. My ex-husband, Robert Kellerman, is what people politely call complicated. Charming when he wants to be, manipulative when he needs to be, and absolutely ruthless when he feels cornered. I met him at a teachers' conference in 1992. He was giving a presentation on educational technology, all confidence and charisma, making jokes that had the entire auditorium laughing. After his talk, he approached me at the coffee station and said, "You have the most attentive, listening face I've ever seen." I was flattered. At 31, I'd resigned myself to spinsterhood, convinced that my window for marriage and family had closed. Robert was different from the men I'd dated before. Ambitious, articulate, seemingly stable. He had a master's degree in education and plans to become a principal someday. He spoke passionately about making a difference in children's lives. How could I have known that beneath that polished exterior was someone who viewed relationships as power games to be won? Our marriage lasted 26 years, but if I'm being honest, it started cracking around year 15. Robert's career ambitions never materialized the way he'd hoped. He remained a middle school math teacher while watching colleagues get promoted around him. The rejection letters from principal positions piled up, and with each one, he became a little more bitter, a little more controlling. He started criticizing small things: how I loaded the dishwasher, my choice of grocery stores, the way I disciplined David. Nothing was ever quite right. I chalked it up to work stress and tried to be more supportive. I took over more of the household responsibilities, thinking that would ease his burden. Instead, it seemed to make him feel more inadequate. The real problems began when David started high school. Suddenly, Robert was competing with our son for my attention. If David and I were watching a movie together, Robert would interrupt with urgent household projects that couldn't wait. If David called while Robert and I were having dinner, Robert would make pointed comments about family time being interrupted. But I was too naive to see the pattern forming, too trusting to recognize manipulation when it was happening right in front of me, too invested in keeping the peace to confront what was really going on. The divorce process was brutal. What started as a mutual decision to separate became an all-out war the moment Robert realized I wouldn't back down on custody arrangements. He wanted David to choose sides, and when our son initially stayed neutral, Robert made it his mission to change that. The whisper campaign started slowly. Casual comments to David about how I was going through a difficult phase. Suggestions that maybe he should give Mom some space to figure things out. Innocent observations about how much happier David seemed when he was staying at his father's apartment downtown. I watched helplessly as my son began pulling away. Our Wednesday phone calls became sporadic, then stopped altogether. Sunday pancakes were replaced with vague excuses about being busy. When I asked David directly if something was wrong, he'd shrug and say everything was fine, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. The custody battle dragged on for 8 months. Robert's lawyer painted me as an overbearing mother who had difficulty accepting her son's independence. They suggested I was emotionally unstable and struggling to cope with the natural evolution of family dynamics. Every loving gesture I'd ever made toward David was twisted into evidence of unhealthy attachment. Meanwhile, Robert positioned himself as the reasonable parent who understood that 18-year-old boys needed space to grow. He rented a downtown apartment with a game room and a pool table. He bought David a car, nothing fancy but reliable enough to give a teenager freedom. He became the fun dad while painting me as the clingy, demanding mother. The manipulation was so subtle, so expertly executed, that even I began questioning myself. Was I too attached to David? Had I made him uncomfortable with my affection? Maybe Robert was right. Maybe I needed to learn to let go. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The David I'd raised for 25 years wouldn't just abandon our relationship without explanation. The boy who used to call me his best friend wouldn't suddenly become cold and distant unless someone was poisoning his mind against me. The final custody hearing took place on a gray October morning. David, now 18 and legally able to choose for himself, sat in the courtroom looking uncomfortable in a suit his father had obviously bought for him. When the judge asked where he wanted to live, David's voice was barely audible as he said, "With my father." I felt my heart shatter in that moment, but I kept my composure. I looked at my son, my beautiful, confused, manipulated son, and nodded. "I understand," I said. "I just want you to be happy." Robert's satisfied smile told me everything I needed to know about his role in David's decision. For the next 3 years, I had minimal contact with my son. Awkward text exchanges on birthdays and holidays, stilted phone conversations that lasted exactly long enough for him to report that he was doing fine and staying busy with work. Any attempt to have deeper conversations was met with polite deflection or sudden excuses to hang up. But I never stopped hoping. Every Thanksgiving, I'd cooked dinner for two, even though I knew David probably wouldn't come. I'd set his place at the table anyway, just in case. This year felt different, though. 3 days before Thanksgiving, David called unexpectedly. "Mom?" His voice sounded strained, older somehow. "Is the invitation still open for Thursday?" My heart jumped. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to have you." "Good," he said, but there was something odd in his tone. "I'll be there around 4. I should have been thrilled, but something felt off about the conversation. David sounded mechanical, like he was reading from a script. Still, I pushed my concerns aside and threw myself into preparation. I bought his favorite stuffing mix, made sure to get the cranberry sauce he liked, even splurged on the expensive dinner rolls from the bakery downtown. For the first time in 3 years, I felt genuinely excited about Thanksgiving. I spent Wednesday cleaning the house from top to bottom, polishing the good china, and setting the dining room table with care. I picked fresh flowers from my garden, mums and autumn leaves that would make a beautiful centerpiece. Everything had to be perfect for David's first visit home in so long. Thursday morning, I was up at dawn preparing the turkey and side dishes. The kitchen filled with the familiar smells of sage and rosemary, butter and brown sugar. I kept checking my phone, hoping David might call to confirm or maybe arrive early like he used to when he was younger. At 3:30, I changed into my best dress, navy blue with a pearl necklace David had given me for my 60th birthday. I styled my hair and put on lipstick, wanting to look my best for my son's homecoming. At exactly 4 o'clock, the doorbell rang. My hands were shaking as I opened the door to find David standing on the porch. He was taller than I remembered, broader in the shoulders, but his face looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he'd lost weight. "Hi, Mom." His hug was brief, almost obligatory. "David, sweetheart, you look—" I started to say he looked thin, but caught myself. "You look good. Come in, everything's almost ready." As we walked toward the dining room, I chatted nervously about the menu, the weather, anything to fill the uncomfortable silence. David nodded and made appropriate responses, but his mind seemed elsewhere. He kept checking his phone and glancing toward the windows. "Are you expecting someone else?" I asked as we sat down to eat. "No," he said quickly. "Just work stuff." But I knew my son, even after 3 years of distance. David was nervous about something, and it wasn't work-related. His leg was bouncing under the table the way it used to when he was hiding something as a child. His answers to my questions were clipped, distracted. Still, I was determined to make the best of it. This was my chance to reconnect with David, to show him that nothing had changed in my love for him. I asked about his job at the marketing firm downtown, his apartment, whether he was dating anyone special. He answered in monosyllables, picking at his food without really eating. "The turkey's delicious, Mom," he said dutifully, though I noticed he'd barely touched it. "Thank you, sweetheart. I remembered you liked the stuffing extra crispy on top." "Yeah." He glanced at his phone again. "That's good." 20 minutes into dinner, I heard a car door slam outside. David's entire body tensed, and his fork clattered against his plate. "David, what's wrong?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. My blood turned to ice because I recognized the silhouette through the frosted glass door panel. Robert. My ex-husband was here, at my house, uninvited and unexpected. "I should get that," David said, starting to rise. "No." My voice was sharper than I intended. "This is my house. I'll answer it." But Robert didn't wait for me to open the door. He had a key. David's key, I realized with growing horror. My ex-husband walked into my dining room like he owned the place, wearing a dark coat and that familiar smirk that used to make my stomach turn during our worst fights. "Hello, Margaret," he said pleasantly, as if dropping by uninvited on Thanksgiving was perfectly normal. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion. David asked me to stop by." I looked at my son, who couldn't meet my eyes. "David? Is this true?" Yeah. Dad wanted to talk to you about something." The air in the room felt thick and dangerous. 3 years of careful distance between Robert and me. 3 years of slowly healing from the damage he'd caused, and here he was in my home, disrupting what should have been a peaceful reunion with my son. "Whatever you have to say, Robert, this isn't the time or place," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Actually, it's exactly the right time." Robert moved closer to David, placing a possessive hand on our son's shoulder. "David has something he needs to get off his chest. Don't you, son?" I watched in growing alarm as Robert leaned down and whispered something in David's ear. My son's face went pale, then red, then pale again, his hands clenched into fists on the table. "David?" I reached across the table toward him. "Whatever your father told you, don't." David's voice was cold, harder than I'd ever heard it. "Just don't, Mom." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The careful table setting I'd arranged so lovingly suddenly felt like a mockery. The turkey grew cold. The candles flickered in the draft from the open door that Robert hadn't bothered to close. "David, please," I said, standing as well. "Let's talk about whatever this is. We can work through anything." "Can we?" His voice was getting louder now, more agitated. "Can we really, Mom? Because I'm not sure you even know what the truth is anymore." I felt the conversation spinning out of control, but I didn't understand why. "Sweetheart, I don't know what your father told you, but stop calling me that," David exploded. "Stop pretending like you care about me when all you've ever cared about is controlling me." The words hit me like physical blows. "David, that's not true. You know that's not true." "Do I?" He was pacing now, his father watching with satisfaction from the doorway. "Because Dad told me some very interesting things about why you really wanted the divorce, about what you said about me during the custody hearings." My heart was racing. Whatever Robert had told David, it was clearly a lie, designed to destroy what little relationship we had left. But I could see the pain in my son's eyes, the genuine hurt and confusion that my ex-husband had cultivated like a poisonous garden. "David, whatever your father told you is not the whole story. Please let me explain." "Explain what? How you told your lawyer that I was emotionally immature and too dependent on my father. How you said I needed intensive therapy to break free from unhealthy patterns." I felt the blood drain from my face. Those words, I had never said those words, but I could see that David believed I had believed it completely. "I never said any of those things, David, never." "Dad has the court transcripts, Mom. He showed them to me." Of course he did. Robert had 3 years to create whatever narrative he wanted, 3 years to forge documents or take my words out of context, 3 years to slowly poison my son against me. And judging by the rage in David's eyes, he'd succeeded completely. "Your father is lying to you," I said quietly. "I don't know what he showed you, but—" "So now Dad's a liar?" David's voice rose to a shout. "First you destroy our family, then you turn me against my own father by calling him a liar?" "I didn't destroy our family, David. I tried to save it for years before—" "Stop!" David screamed, and in that moment I saw something snap behind his eyes, something that had been building for years under Robert's careful manipulation. "Just stop lying to me!" That's when his hand came up, fast and sharp, connecting with my face with a sound that echoed through the dining room like a gunshot. The force of it sent me stumbling sideways into the table, and I crashed among the dishes and silverware I'd so carefully arranged. Gravy spilled across the white tablecloth. The centerpiece scattered across the floor. The room fell completely silent except for the sound of my own breathing. David stood frozen, his hand still raised, his face a mask of shock and horror at what he'd just done. Robert remained in the doorway, and for just a moment I caught a glimpse of pure satisfaction in his expression, before he quickly rearranged his features into concern. This was the moment Robert had been building toward for 3 years, the moment when his manipulation would finally bear its poisonous fruit. He wanted to see David strike me. He wanted to destroy not just my relationship with my son, but my son's relationship with himself. But as I lay there among the broken dishes and spilled food, something unexpected happened. Instead of crying, instead of shouting, instead of doing what any normal person would do after being hit by their own child, I smiled. "Thank you," I said clearly, looking directly into David's horrified eyes. He paused, completely disoriented and speechless. The rage that had been driving him suddenly deflated, replaced by confusion and growing horror at what he'd just done. He wasn't prepared for my next step. Because you see, I'd been preparing for this moment for months. I knew this day would come. The day when Robert's 3 years of manipulation would finally push David to the breaking point. I'd hired a private investigator. I'd consulted with lawyers. I'd set up recording devices throughout my house. And most importantly, I'd learned to smile in the face of evil, because sometimes the most powerful response to manipulation is the one your manipulator never sees coming. David stood there, his hand slowly dropping to his side, staring at me like he'd never seen me before. And maybe he hadn't. Maybe the woman he'd just struck was a stranger to him, a figment of his father's imagination, a villain in a story Robert had been telling for 3 long years. But the woman smiling back at him from the floor, the woman who'd just thanked him for showing his true colors, that woman was about to change everything. I stood up slowly, brushing cranberry sauce off my navy dress, never breaking eye contact with David. His face had gone completely white, and I could see his hands beginning to shake as the reality of what he'd just done started to sink in. "Mom, he started, but I held up my hand. "David, before you say anything else, there's something you need to see." I walked calmly to the living room, leaving him standing frozen in the dining room with his father. From the bookshelf, I retrieved a small tablet that I'd hidden behind my collection of Jane Austen novels. "I've been recording our conversation since your father walked through that door." The color drained completely from Robert's face. "Margaret, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Collecting evidence," I said simply, returning to the dining room. "You see, David, I knew this day would come. I've known for months that your father was building up to something like this, so I hired a private investigator 3 months ago." "Wha—" David looked back and forth between Robert and me, confusion replacing the anger in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" I tapped the screen, and suddenly Robert's voice filled the room, crystal clear, undeniable. "Listen, David, your mother has been playing the victim for 3 years now. She's manipulated everyone into thinking I'm the bad guy. But the truth is, she's been planning to destroy our relationship from the beginning. She told her lawyer that you were emotionally unstable, that you needed to be separated from me for your own good. She said you were too dependent on me, that it was unhealthy." David's voice followed. "She really said that about me?" "She did, and worse. She said you were immature, that you couldn't think for yourself. She wanted full custody specifically so she could send you to some kind of therapy program to deprogram you from my influence. Your own mother thinks you're weak, David. She thinks you're a child who can't make his own decisions." The recording continued with Robert's voice growing more venomous. "She's going to act all innocent when you confront her. She'll probably cry, play the victim, make you feel guilty for standing up to her. But you have to stay strong. Show her that you're not the weak little boy she thinks you are. Show her that her manipulation won't work anymore. Sometimes you have to get physical to make people understand that you won't be pushed around." The silence in the room was deafening. David stared at the tablet like it was a live grenade. "I never said any of those things about you, David," I said quietly. "Not to my lawyer, not to anyone. Your father made all of that up." "But the court transcripts—" David's voice was barely a whisper. "Forgeries or doctored documents. I have the real transcripts right here." I pulled out a manila folder from the buffet drawer. "Would you like to see what I actually said about you during the custody hearings?" David nodded numbly. I opened the folder and began reading. David is the most compassionate, intelligent, and emotionally mature young man I've ever known. My only concern is that his father seems to be using him as a weapon in our divorce, and I worry about the psychological impact that kind of manipulation might have on any child, no matter how strong they are. I would never want to separate David from his father. I only want to protect him from being used as a pawn in our adult problems. David's legs gave out and he collapsed into his chair. Oh God, what have I done? Robert stepped forward aggressively. Don't listen to her, David. She's manipulating you again. She probably faked that recording. With what? I interrupted. Robert, this recording was made 15 minutes ago in this room. It's your voice, giving our son explicit instructions to assault me. There's no faking that. But I wasn't done. From the same folder, I pulled out a thick stack of papers. David, would you like to see the emails your father has been sending you for the past 3 years? The ones where he systematically fed you lies about me. I began reading from the printouts. Your mother called again today, pretending to miss you. Don't fall for it. She's just trying to guilt you into coming back so she can control you again. Another one. I saw your mother at the grocery store. She looked happy. Probably because she finally got rid of the burden of dealing with us. And another, your mother's lawyer called mine today. She's trying to get the custody agreement modified so she never has to see you again. With each email I read, David's face grew more horrified. These aren't true, are they? None of them, I said. I called you every week for 6 months after the divorce was finalized. You never answered. I sent birthday cards, Christmas gifts, graduation money. Did you ever receive any of them? David turned slowly to look at his father. Dad? Robert's composure was cracking. She's lying, David. She's manipulating you just like she always has. She's probably been planning this whole setup for months, coaching herself on what to say. 3 years, I said firmly. I've been documenting your manipulation of our son for 3 years, Robert. Every lie you told him, every piece of false evidence you created, every time you poisoned his mind against me, I have it all. I pulled out another folder, this one even thicker. Bank records showing that I've been putting money into a college fund for David every month since the divorce, even though you told him I cut off all financial support. Phone records showing 127 unanswered calls to David's number over 2 years. Credit card statements proving I bought him birthday and Christmas gifts that somehow never reached him. David was staring at his father with growing horror. Dad, did you keep Mom's gifts from me? Robert's face had turned red. You don't understand the bigger picture here, David. She was trying to buy your affection. Answer the question, David shouted, standing up so abruptly his chair fell over. Did you keep her gifts from me? Did you intercept her calls? The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Finally, Robert's shoulders sagged in defeat. You don't understand what she did to our family. Oh my God. David buried his face in his hands. You've been lying to me for 3 years. Everything you told me about Mom was a lie. But I still wasn't finished. The most damning evidence was yet to come. David, there's one more thing you need to know. Robert, tell him about Sandra. Robert went completely rigid. Margaret, don't. Tell him about the affair that started 2 years before our divorce. Tell him about the apartment you rented with her while you were still married to me. Tell him about the credit cards you opened in my name to pay for your double life. David looked like he'd been struck by lightning. What affair? I handed him a final folder. Private investigator reports, photographs, financial records. Your father wasn't just unfaithful, David. He was systematically stealing from our family to support his girlfriend. When I discovered it and asked for a divorce, he decided the best defense was a good offense. So he made me the villain in your mind while painting himself as the victim of a cold, controlling woman. David opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photographs of Robert with a blonde woman, bank statements showing transfers to accounts I'd never heard of, receipts from restaurants and hotels charged to credit cards in my name. You destroyed our family, David whispered to his father. Not Mom. You. Robert's mask finally slipped completely. Your mother was cold, David. She was more interested in her books and her teaching than in being a real wife. Sandra understood me. Stop. David's voice was deadly quiet. Just stop talking. For the first time in 3 years, I saw my real son emerge from behind the wall of lies and manipulation his father had built around him. The David I'd raised, the compassionate boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on insects, who brought home stray cats and wounded birds. Mom. He turned to me with tears streaming down his face. I hit you. I actually hit you. You did, I said gently, but you weren't hitting me, sweetheart. You were hitting the version of me that your father created in your mind, the controlling, manipulative woman who never existed except in his stories. How can you forgive me? How can you even look at me? I walked over to my son and took his hands in mine. Because I know who you really are, David. I know the man I raised. This isn't you. This is what 3 years of psychological manipulation can do to even the strongest person. David collapsed against me, sobbing like the little boy he used to be when he'd had a nightmare and needed his mother to make the world make sense again. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I know you are, baby. I know. But Robert wasn't finished. This is exactly what she wants, David. She's manipulating you right now, making you feel guilty so you'll come crawling back to her. Can't you see what she's doing? I felt David tense in my arms, but instead of pulling away, he turned to face his father with a strength I'd never seen before. What I see, David said clearly, is a man who spent 3 years systematically destroying his son's relationship with his mother because he couldn't face the consequences of his own actions. What I see is someone who would rather turn his child into a weapon than take responsibility for cheating on his wife and stealing from his family. Robert opened his mouth to argue, but David wasn't done. What I see is a father who just convinced his son to assault his mother on Thanksgiving Day because it served his sick need for revenge. You made me hit her, Dad. You manipulated me into becoming someone I never wanted to be. The transformation in David was remarkable. 3 years of anger and confusion were dissolving, replaced by clarity and growing outrage at how he'd been used. David, you're not thinking clearly, Robert started. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in 3 years, David shot back. I've been living in the story you created, believing lies you fed me, hating a woman who never did anything except love me unconditionally. You turned me into your weapon against Mom, and I hate myself for letting you do it. I reached for my phone. I'm calling the police now, Robert. This recording is evidence of conspiracy to commit assault, and I have 3 years' worth of documentation showing your harassment and manipulation. You can't be serious, Margaret. I'm David's father. You stopped being his father the moment you decided to use him to hurt me, I said, dialing 911. Hello? I need to report an assault and harassment. My ex-husband manipulated my son into striking me, and I have audio evidence of the conspiracy. Robert's face went through a series of expressions: rage, fear, desperation, and finally, defeat. He knew his 3-year campaign of psychological warfare was over. David, he made one last attempt, you know I love you. Everything I did was to protect you from her. Love? David's voice was incredulous. You call destroying my relationship with my mother love. You call turning me into someone who would hit a woman love? You stole 3 years of my life, Dad. 3 years I could have spent with Mom, building real memories instead of living in your fantasy of revenge. The police arrived 20 minutes later. I showed them the recording, the forged documents, the evidence of financial fraud and stalking. Robert was arrested for harassment, conspiracy to commit assault, and fraud. As they led him away in handcuffs, he made one final attempt to manipulate the situation. This is what she wanted all along, David. She's destroyed our family. But David didn't even look at him. Our family was destroyed the day you decided revenge was more important than your son's well-being. After the police left, David and I sat in the living room surrounded by the evidence of Robert's 3-year deception. The turkey was cold, the dining room was a mess, and both of us were emotionally drained. "How did you know?" David asked. "How did you know he would do this?" "Because I know your father better than he thinks I do. I knew he couldn't resist the opportunity to watch you hurt me. It's what he's been building towards since the day I filed for divorce. But why didn't you just show me all this evidence before? Why did you let me hate you for 3 years?" I sighed, feeling every one of my 62 years. "Because you wouldn't have believed me, sweetheart. If I'd shown up at your apartment with these documents, your father would have convinced you they were fake. You had to see his manipulation in action. You had to experience the moment when his lies pushed you to do something that went against every value I raised you with." David was quiet for a long time, processing everything that had happened. "I need to start therapy, don't I? I think that would be very wise. And anger management classes, given what happened today. Will you come with me to some of the sessions?" My heart swelled with hope for the first time in 3 years. "If you want me there, I'll be there." That night, we ordered Chinese takeout and ate it while sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by the detritus of Robert's psychological warfare. David read through every email, every forged document, every piece of evidence that showed how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. "I feel like I've been living someone else's life," he said around midnight. "The person I've been for the past 3 years, angry, resentful, cold. That's not who I am." "No, it's not, but it's also not entirely your fault. What your father did to you is a form of psychological abuse, David. It's going to take time to undo that damage." 6 months later, David graduated from anger management and had been in therapy twice a week since that Thanksgiving. Our relationship was slowly rebuilding, but it was different now, stronger in some ways, more fragile in others. The legal consequences for Robert were severe. The fraud charges alone resulted in a prison sentence, and the restraining order meant he couldn't contact either of us. But the real victory wasn't legal, it was psychological. David had broken free from his father's manipulation and was learning to think independently again. We established new traditions. Every Sunday we went to therapy together. Every Wednesday David came over for dinner. Simple meals, honest conversations, and the slow work of rebuilding trust. We never went back to Murphy's Diner. Too many complicated memories, but we found a new place that made excellent blueberry pancakes. "I understand now why you smiled that day," David said during one of our Wednesday dinners. "You weren't happy that I hit you. You were relieved that the truth was finally coming out." "I was heartbroken that it had come to that," I corrected. "But yes, I was relieved. I knew that once you saw what your father's manipulation had turned you into, you'd find your way back to who you really are." The transformation in David was remarkable to witness. The angry, bitter young man who'd struck me, that Thanksgiving slowly disappeared, replaced by someone who was thoughtful, introspective, and committed to understanding how he'd been manipulated. He started reading about psychological abuse, attending support groups for adult children of narcissistic parents, and even began volunteering with organizations that helped families affected by domestic violence. "I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else," he told me. "I want people to recognize the signs of manipulation before it's too late." 1 year after that terrible Thanksgiving, we were preparing for the holiday again. This time, it was just the two of us. But the atmosphere was completely different. David arrived early to help with cooking, full of stories about his new job and the woman he'd been dating, someone who appreciated his gentleness and emotional awareness. "I never thanked you," he said as we peeled potatoes together. "For what?" "For not giving up on me, for seeing who I really was even when I couldn't see it myself, for having the courage to let me hit rock bottom so I could find my way back up." I set down my peeler and looked at my son, really looked at him. The dark circles were gone. The tension in his shoulders had eased. He looked like himself again for the first time in 4 years. "You don't need to thank me for loving you, David. That's what mothers do." "Not all mothers," he said quietly. "Not all mothers would have had the strength to play the long game the way you did. You could have written me off when I hit you. You could have pressed charges, gotten revenge, made sure I understood how badly I'd hurt you. Instead, you used that moment to save both of us." That evening, as we sat around our new Thanksgiving table, smaller, more intimate, but infinitely more honest than the one from the year before, David raised his glass of sparkling cider. "To second chances," he said. "To authentic connections," I added, remembering the insights from my own therapy about what I'd learned from this experience. "And to the courage to face uncomfortable truths," David concluded. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in 4 years, I felt like we were a real family again. The story of that Thanksgiving has become something of a legend in our therapy group. Dr. Chen, David's therapist, sometimes uses it as an example of how manipulation victims can find their way back to reality and how families can heal from even the most devastating psychological abuse. "Your mother's strategy was risky," she told David during one session I attended, "but she understood something important about manipulation. Sometimes the only way to break someone free is to let them see the logical conclusion of the lies they've been told." David nodded. "She let me become the person Dad's manipulation was turning me into, and it was so horrible that I couldn't ignore the truth anymore." But the real lesson, I think, is about the power of patient love. For 3 years, I waited. I documented. I prepared. I never stopped believing that my real son was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of lies and manipulation. And I was right. Today, David calls every Wednesday at 7 o'clock, just like he used to in college. We have our Sunday morning pancakes again, though at a different restaurant. He's learned to recognize manipulation tactics and has become an advocate for others who've experienced similar psychological abuse. Most importantly, he's learned to trust his own judgment again instead of depending on others to tell him how to think and feel. "The scariest part," he told me recently, "wasn't that Dad lied to me. It was how completely I believed those lies, how I let someone else's version of reality replace my own memories and experiences." "That's what makes psychological manipulation so insidious," I replied. "It doesn't just change how you think about other people. It changes how you think about yourself." "I'm never letting anyone do that to me again," David said firmly. "And I'm going to make sure other people know how to recognize it when it's happening to them. That's my son, the real David, the one I raised to stand up for himself and others, the one who turns his pain into purpose and his healing into help for others." The smile I gave him that Thanksgiving wasn't just about revealing the truth. It was about believing in the future we could build together once that truth finally came to light. And I was right to believe